Amla Janjo Bardo Dani Jabzunji Taki Chinzo Jebe Sonam Je Dola Benjen Sanje Do Barasho Sanje Chedan Zoje Jonam La Janjo Bardo Dani Jabzunji Taki Chinzo Jebe Sonam Je Dola Benjen Sanje Do Barasho Sanje Chedan Zoje Jonam La Janjo Bardo Dani Jabzunji Dagi Jinzo Jebe Sonam Je Dola Binjin Sanjin Do Barajo Simchen Damje Dewa Dan Deve Judan Dembaran Juji Simchen Damje Dunga Dan Dunga Je Judan Dawaran Juji Simchen Damje Dunga Mebe Dewa Dan Mida Waran Juji Simchen Damje Nirin Jadan Nidan Dan Nyom La Ne Baran Juro Je Simchen Damje Dewa Dan Deve Judan Dembaran Juji Simchen Damje Dungal Dan Dungal Je Judan Dawaran Simchen Damje Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Mida Waran Juji Simchen Damje Nirin Jadan Nidan Dan Nyom La Ne Baran Juro Je Simchen Damje Dewa Dan Deve Judan Dembaran Juji Simchen Damje Dungal Dan Dungal Je Judan Dawaran Simchen Damje Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Mida Waran Juji Simchen Damje Nirin Jadan Nidan Dan Nyom La Ne Baran Juro Je Zajibu Yo Je Men Do Dan Re Ra Lin Je Nye De Yen Ban Di San Ye Jin Do Me De Bo Wa Ye Do Gun Nan Da Shin La Che Bar Sho Yi Da Guru Rena Mendalak Nian Darya Mi. In English. And Dharma and Sangha. By the merit creating this practice, may all attain state Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all development take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. By the merit created in this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May I take refuge in this Dharma and Sangha. By the merit created in this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be enjoy happiness and in causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and in causes. May all sentient beings be never disparate from joyful place. May all sentient beings be abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and in causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and in causes. May all sentient beings be never disparate from joyful place. May all sentient beings be abide equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Sentient beings be free of happiness and in causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and in causes. May all sentient beings never be separate from joyful place. May all sentient beings be very and
this ground and on straight balance, small, how the visual artist is Buddha field and how I pray. May all living beings enjoy the feeling.
Rajana Medala Gania Daria Mi. Happy to the drink Puina Chicken Shot, Shaman, Shama Hapa, and the teacher. Tabge doje shaje redo jenje medo doje bonjon ba seje lumbo daburo jebe go shaje jabo jola chaza Pange Damboro Chanchu Dujene Sonam Yeshe Sonye Sonze Jen Dundere Zeba Gajen Roa Yen Kunjuru Chola Dage Deba Lanam Duzen Dube Yene Dalayan Bane Alanchen Teje Rila Sine Lamo Yuru Me Lunzo Jubaranzela Chas Dawa Chunzo Shagi Sebo Ne Tashe Lumbe Tsato Tambe Sanda Gajen Gide Chenjo Rizo Ngenze Chasa Juno Doden Mi Singende Anga Manga Dane Gyuza Gyo Demba Jenam Sache Ne Tenda Me Parantela Chasa Jiden Chedan Dumbara Chawa Dan Kana Mado Bonje Tsumo Ye Kordan Denze Tabla Keba Ye Gyalze Kyon Warantela Chasa Korwe Chawa Nimbo Meze Ne Kimne Junde Kala Shene Jang Chuden Namda Dundu Nile Nye Rabdo Jung Warantela Chasa Tumbe Chanchu Truba Kone Kyang Nyeran Zanen Damdo Lodo Do Kawa Chenze Tsundu Tajin Samten Chonyen Zela Chaza Toba Menen Beba Tunye Je Mangan Daye Chanchu Shindron Do Kilron Meo Ngombara Sanje Chanchu Sobaran Zela Chaza Lo Tujen Dola Nyudu Sinini Varanasi Laso Nejo Chuje Kolo Gone Dojana Teba Sumla Gwenze Chaza Lo Shenge Gowa Ngeba Saje Ne Mode Tumba Tudan Lech Komo Jige Yodo Denando Tuba Yule Gyala Chaza Lo Siba Suna Peme Yundenje Yendo Yoba Chudu Chembo Lamin Doha Gunje Rabche Be Temba Yebaran Zela Chaza Lelo Chenam Chula Gube Sacho Chonke Saje Samaru Chime Doje Dabe Koshe Yangan Debaran Zela Chazala Yanda Nido Njeba Meze Mao Tiljen Sonamba Tenye Dune Rense Mandone Kudun Chajen Zela Chazalo Tedra Tembe Dabo Chomdenje Zebe Solando Samtemba Keben Joa Gunje Cheba Yang Teje Nye Chedan Sumbura Tejen Jeba Kigo Chendra Dan Kordan Kuze Sedan Shinga Kyoge Tsenjo Sambo Chendra Wa Tendra Kona Dazo Gyora Kyola Tejen Sowa Tabe Dazo Kanto Nebe Sach Nedan Obo Damje Shewa Dan Chedan Tashi Pewa Zedo So Tadirin Puyi Chibu Chichisu
그래 가진 진짜 시스템으로 같이 좀
Dashi Lan Dichi Kwa Kama Ngas Komchikena
meditation.
So that's amal touch the leg.
Just low to all.
Di cheta tiring cheta ne tiring ki chuji do den shira mangpo shira mindo di dan den tanda tiring ki ta cheta tiring tanda dawa di la ne pheba ki chiso do shin ba na chik saka dawa la ne chik chu che ki chik chu che na ne chu che sheba di la ne phen dang chik ta chu zena de gewa kharish to ba na di la gewa kang to ba di la gewa yang ne pi chik phen dang ni ba chimbo yo ba ngonzi ya dang ta chik gewa mayin ba ki chile do den shi sagi yoba ina tila yang chik nyeba la sopa tende chik tigyun da mandawa chik tewa dogo da yoba tende chik namgyun kagyun la sonde gore yongda so chik sungo re ta sangma kya ina ka chik da dogo chik re ta chik chio ke jor kandi chik cheba ina sakal dawa di nangla ina chik ya chik tigyun chik cheba ina tila yang chik yawa nyi sum tende yonga kya ina nipa dan tende yore se sumba na chingi ta tanda dawa di sakal dawa se te zamba la chik sangye kya ina zeban 상기 단단히 탑게 두지만 저 교와 디나라 질 상기 긴 제바 망보 예배나니 제바 중이 다 뒤니 순고란 제바 중이 기나네 다와 디나라 다 개체쇼 데카레 상기 긴 꿀탄 벤 제바 아니 직 상기 제바 군양을 렌데 제바 숨 저게 개바 연상 대대기 괜찮을 때네 다직 당한 조치 도자 딜네 대간 도자 대솔라니 직 소소놈 사이지 고갈라마선 다 딘디 제야게네 고갑지 차고레 상가도
Today's topic that we have is not that long, and this month being a Sagadawa, in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there is a belief, a tradition that whatever positive virtuous activities that you do, it multiplies, as well as the opposite negative destructive that you do also kind of has more kind of impact, and therefore we started with the recitations of the prayer translated as the praise of the Buddha with skillful means and compassion. And in this recitation, basically this praise about praising Buddha for his what's called deeds, or translated as acts, great praise of the 12 acts of Buddha. Generally, there are many Buddhist performances or acts or deeds, but in this text, as we usually or commonly kind of find, there are 12 Buddhist deeds or acts. And within these 12, the three are more important that was performed in this Sakala months: his birth, his attaining of Buddhahood, and then his nirvana or passing away were performed in this month. So therefore, this month is considered as for the practitioners a great opportunity to create positive merits or virtuous seeds.
온디르샤 다 드링한 저 단다디 탑게 투지마데 단당한 저 보이는 직전 보인다 셴바네 내서 합다 직니 라인은 아주 정말 냠도에니 보이는 인지니라 동고스 단다디에니 직 프린트나 가르치나 직 대리치고 셀랑하죠.
So this time we just recited in Tibetan. From next session we will recite both in Tibetan as well as in English. So we'll have this distributed, maybe actual paper or maybe through digital.
온덴도 된다 띠인도 삼발라 단단데 지단니 다상기긴 제방한조 제바제도 제바 중이 에네 직 제바 땅보다 녀바 숨바제를 리치네 다민 딘데 다직 단단데 민 슈바이나 다직 요라 단다디나 에네 직다 장가도 지치바이나 직그 대상이 갈데네네 포벤 제바다 윤길룬수 주벤 제바 꿀탄벤 제바 주니롤 롤테긴 제바제는디 주니롤 제긴 제바다 주미콜도 주콜라 롤벤제바 랍둔주벤제바 카와체벤제바 전주님보 셰벤제바 뒤두벤제바 옹버서바 상제벤제바 주주콜로콜 제바 냥알렌 데벤 제바세는 제바 중이 된데스 요레된 제바 중이 기능네 다 제바 중이 제바 중이 단다디 배자되는라 다 지금 제바 가wan 제마제다 된데 카살 연구도 단다디 할다 많이 봐 셰마 합다 되는라 지나틱 디 배자데 코난 시자 지능은 좀 되지니 도고 단다디 민디 지금 레레지니 슈투는 주네트 메네 다란
So in this, praise to the Buddha, as we said earlier, praise for his 12 deeds or acts of Buddha, and as said here, 12, there are 12. So we can go into more detail later. But 12 deeds starts with descending from Tushita heaven and entering into his mother's womb, taking birth, becoming skilled in worldly arts, enjoying palace life, renouncing the worldly life, and 7, undergoing ascetic practices, 8, proceeding to the Buddha tree, 9, defeating the Maras, 10, attaining full enlightenment, 11, turning the wheel of Dharma, and then 12, passing into parinirvana or deceased.
온데네 다는 제바 중이데 데레 제바 중이 다는 제바 중이 단다 탑게 토지나라 다직 치게 다직 레레나라 지금 제바기 데다 제바다 데네 지금 제바가 네 가와이면다 데네 카살 연구도 애니다 셰라 네 셰마하다데 제나 디체마제나 디체고 데텔라 바유도 사마야 사마야 지 사징을 로테네 야고도 저데 지슈
So in this praise that we just recited, each verse is actually kind of presents the location of the deeds that he performed and what deeds or act. So we can go through that later, but before next session, it would be good if you can just go do your own readings of this recitation.
어디치 되는 데 믹스게 다 단다단 남중은 응하는 두 서브젝트를 좋아하네 지단 단다디나 질 테마다 테마다 체민 길로디 간라레 다 드린로 서브젝트 지단에 단다 디나라 숨바나제레 소라나서 체민 남자 때나 베베 고바니 기부 데든 농벌도 투비치 인트 대한지든 감소민데 동안 나서 받아 대다 유기 내술 치진 마시비 왕견 중심 세 단다디 지단에 테마다 체민길로 제대 잠발라 단다디 간라 직 쇼레 인지나라도 오츠도 단다디나 테스토듀치마도 포민도 지단에 체만 남자기 쇼운단 된데다 빼망보여랬다 지단에 단다디 간라 도듀치 디나 강 요바나진 된데 시간 마도 도디 요바된데 요바나진 지당에 쇼야기 배전치고 다 간달게 지단에 체마다 체민세야 된 것도 레라오제 삼로타와나 직 돈다 ngoma 직 강 임바당 마임바 텐데질라 삼로탄 거라
Thank you. The Buddha loss and into the Lord.
인진의 말로나 디게 된다 텐데질라 와이나 페나 당보 세마다 세민길로 제대 삼발라 다직 다랑 딜라도 딘 마임바 다랑 디게니 세마다 세민라도 삼발라 직 만원도 롤라 둠데오지 삼로탄 와이나 직 다직 오늘 다 ngara ngobi nezula ngoma yimba da maimba
Going back to our regular text, it's on page 70, unmarked page 75, valid and mistaken, valid versus non-valid forms of cognition. In our book, it is presented in a very kind of short, precise way or manner. But if you go back into the actual text of epistemology, the text is very extensive and long kind of a text. Nevertheless, we will just go through what we have in our book. And in a very kind of general sense, valid and mistaken or non-valid forms of cognition. And in simple form, it refers to valid meaning factual, realistic, and non-valid or mistaken refers to the opposite, not based on fact or not based on evidence.
dire ta tanda di sema da semi shebe kaptu de la tanda nga zo tu gyun do nga zo chik dewa dang dongal kandi chi yo ba de zu chasan tanda ta dila tane ta nga zo chik dewa yonga gi gyu dang dongal yonga gi gyu tanda nga zo dongal yonga di kharchi ni yongore dongal yonga gi gyu di ra ma tyo ba da ha ma go ba da ma she ba da luwa ta dendi song zang ta di nga zo dongal yongora ta denze to ba ina de ni dongal yonga gi gyu di chik me gi 탑때 땐땐 하고 와들라 다 체마 하마고 와들라 세민 땐데 도지 차고라 어디다 대화 요래다
Um, so in our kind of daily life experience, when we look into what we desire, which is happiness, and what we don't want, suffering, both of these has its own causes. And for the suffering, generally the causes of the suffering is not knowing, ignorance, distorted or non-valid perception. So these are the cause of the suffering. And if you're able to kind of really understand this origin or the sources of distortion or mistaken, then there is a way to kind of way to attain what we want and eliminate the very cause of what we don't want, suffering, which is suffering.
tanda dinga la sumba na je sema yang ta ba je nyena se sema yang ta ba je nyena se na re ta gyunzen da tende yang ta ba je thong yin de la yi tende shi je gi ni ta chu khang da khang yin la je ba yin re ha go wa yin na de gi ni chik norwa da thuwa la ni nga zo man ro wa da tende la ni pendo yo ba yin zang da nga zo tanda dinge ni she ba da tanda de zo cha sang tende la gyu ro wa ta ta tu lo ri ding gi tsemba lo ri ding gi nang lo ne ta lo ri ding la so ba da ta lori dundi nanglo ni tanga zo yewa nisu yewa de la ya riba nisu jina ne ta tiring tanda ni sema da simi gi lo yewa de zo yang ta din chik dinde tunda de den hago wa ina tanga zo chik mamon ba da chik ma shewa ma yin ba ta chik so la ta chik khari chu khandi kanda kan yin ba ina ti gunzen ya go so hago wa tubya la ni ta pento grez
As said in the text in the very first paragraph in the middle, if one can find the valid means of knowing, then in reliance on them, one can engage in correct norms of what is to be affirmed and what is to be rejected. In this way, one will be able to accomplish the desired goals. So as said earlier, if you understood this well, the valid and non-valid forms of cognition, under this also comes the earlier, seven like types of consciousness or cognition that we studied. And when you understood this, then there is a benefit, with proper understanding, it will help you to kind of really sort of navigate, doesn't matter what topics or what, the subject that you are involved, engaged or into, it will, kind of help you to sort of not to be under the power of ignorance or distortions and mistaken, and led you to a proper understanding.
Tandi wate lani shung tanda rikti ki lungchi tangi do yangda pe sheba ni kibi tuan tamchi chubi ngun tuan rowa chen yinbe te yinbe na te tendo she sungpa shi no se wote te chik sung tena do.
And then immediately after that, there's a quote from Drop of Reasoning, Dharmakirti's text. It says, quote unquote, since correct cognition is the prerequisite to the fulfillment of everyone's aims, I will explain it.
Wote che ta dine tanda di kyablo ki pre tsemba tenzo nang la khari yungu do zena ta chik chidane tsema ki ni kedo la tsema ki kedo la tanda di sanskrit kedo la tama na shibi tende chik sungu do tanda pena di la inji nang la tarang kyo shay ro tama na tangpo da mana cheba chalwa tangpo dan chalwa ni zen di sambala tangpo hako chalwa zedi sambala chik tokba hago wada woshi, tangbor jalwa. Ngar ma tobe che ton, tangbor tobe na saton jalwa tsema de, tseme ki ke di chigido, tanda di kapsula, tsemaji kedo de chik deshekigdo od degi yapdenla ene chik mashi tunji sache kyang se de sumba dinala ene chik tsemanamde na sumba na jingi dinala tara rangi jalchala milowe jalche cho yinbe na tsema de tangbo didi chik shuna.
Then in the next paragraph, we have etymology of the word, the actual Sanskrit word, which is Brahman. The Sanskrit word for valid cognition is Brahman, which is composed of two parts, pra and man. Although the prefix pra can have many meanings, in this case it means, so pra means first, and second man means to measure, comprehend, realize, or know. Therefore, valid cognition is that which first or newly comprehends something that was not realized before. So it refers to, first kind of comprehension, initial comprehension, and something that has been not comprehended before or prior. And then we have, a scriptural quote from Exposition of Valid Cognition, saying that it also reveals an object not known before.
어디니 데스크 뭐만다 오도지 숨도 어디나 요는 지직 주셔나. tsemanomdelde.
Yes.
주세요.
On the law side, the water.
다른데. 오늘 다 된다 단다 딩엘라 안쪽이 당하나서 고세기 디에네 다 세마게네 갈로 생이도 오던데 다 디간라 생이 뭐 디네 쇼니 샤베 생이도 디간라 송도 왔다 서도 밀로에 리바 세메 뭐다 생이 세메 뭐 빼나다 세메 뭐제 대상발라 디간라 딘조 콘조 켄도나 야고도 생이 기술되니 서도 셰베 메베 제시임바 저 밀로와 셰베 이니 이죠다 대좀 로션은 세마임바 리바제베 리바지 메베 미완 수젠바 tsema 저버 송 잔디 인지나도 돼요. 다른도 어디디 다른 슈나티 다티직 대양직 지단에 단다에 tsema기 tseni들 사도밀로 리바 다디 사도 셰바디기 다직 제야다 tsema다 다디 마임바 tsema 제튼도 오레레레체네 단디나 숨바네 슈샤나.
On page 76, we have a definition of valid cognition. A definition of valid cognition is newly acquired and non-deceptive cognition. The part of this definition that says, quote and unquote, newly excludes subsequent cognition from being valid cognition, subsequent cognition, one of the cognition that we stated earlier. The part that says, quote and unquote, non-deceptive excludes correct assumption, doubt, distorted cognition from being valid cognition. The part that says cognition, quote and unquote, excludes physical sense faculty and so on from being valid cognition. So when you look at the definition, newly acquired, deceptive cognition, each word has its own sort of purpose, and each word excludes, what is not a valid cognition.
어디제 다다나 jingi 단다 디간라 디 captain 디기 captain del라 에네 tsema namdelina tsema lume chensheba tunjen neba니 미루셰다 마시 tunji 사제 janche yulngopin nesolda tumbar 다 셰베나 밀로와다 율 당버 셰바am 라완도 용수 제베 사토수 순소 단다 디기 치제디기 데와도 다란 인지나라 고 두고는 다란디 메나야 지단에 단다 디에네 네 ngoben nesulda timba nebe timba shebatela ne kala miluwa digala miluwa da luwa zedu zambala da chik luwa zedu zambala da norwa da tulwa dezu da luwa chatura miluwa zedu zambala dende mayin balzila ne miluwa di suyungu no dende chik.
And then we have a quote from Exposition of Valid Cognition immediately after what we read earlier on page 76. Valid cognition is non-deceptive cognition regarding its object's ability to perform a function. It is non-deceptive, and it also reveals an object not known before. Again, kind of sort of back up, as a support of the definition that was provided earlier. That is to say, consciousness that accords with the object's real way of existing is non-deceptive. consciousness that accords with object's real way of existing is non-deceptive, or we can say the factual, the factual one. Also, since it cognizes an object for the first time or determines it on its own accord, it is characterized as quote unquote newly realizing. Alternatively, valid cognition can be defined as consciousness that is non-deceptive regarding its comprehended comprehended object which has its determined on its own accord. So again, in simple words, as we said earlier, valid cognition is the factual, real, and non-valid is mistaken or distorted cognition.
지단에 단다 디간라 지단에 다 용다수 단다 공도 단다 디 서도 밀로에 리바 세명와다 용다레 다디 단디나라 단다 디 디간라 테마임바 셴바지야 라운드 랑고 제베샤자라 루아메바 루아메베 셴바데 세명와 조겐 덴디 요바 예사라디야 셴바지 샤단지 인사 다간다 디간라 디와라 춘제는 도다 디니 단다 디 샤단데조 에네 도데 바네 오마라조 라조바 탐제 에네 네 샤단데라 퉁그레 송도.
So the definition that we find at the top of the page 76, a valid cognition is newly acquired, and non-deceptive cognition is sort of commonly accepted definition. But then there are different interpretations, which one of which is we just read earlier. Alternatively, valid cognition can be defined as consciousness that is non-deceptive regarding its comprehended object. From the four different comprehended object, which it has determined on its own accord. So under that it says, on this point, the definition of valid cognition, the views of the Buddhist schools from the Swatantrika or Sutra school up to the Swatantrika Madhyamika are in harmony. So up to Sutra school up to middle way autonomy school interpretations of what or definition of valid cognition. Yes. So after that, in Chandrakriti's clear words, however, Dekyong's definition of valid cognition and views on direct perception and so on are refuted on the grounds that they are set forth on the basis of presupposing inherently existent phenomena. In Chandrakriti's own system, valid cognition is posited only on the basis of being non-deceptive, in agreement with what is commonly accepted in everyday conventions of the world. Therefore, being quote unquote non-deceptive alone exhausts the meaning of what a valid cognition is, and there is no need to add the qualification quote unquote new realizing to the definition. So we need to understand from statements such as this that there are unique epistemological views in Chandrakriti's system.
지단 단다 체마제도 잠발라다 셰바 체마다 기부 체마다 롱 체마소 롱 체마제네 텐데 다마 버다 펜나 단다 셰바 체마세도 잠발라 단다가 조카수 바바 단다 다라 셰바 체마다 기부 체마 롱 체마 숨여 벤나네 다 셰바 체마데 체마 ngwedo la cha 기부 체마다 롱 체마제야데 다 체마 ngwe 마임바 지단에 다 텐데기 다셰 요레 다 기부 체마세도 잠발라 기부 양다바 펜나 단다 천지도 샤바이나 다 즉 다자 뜸바다 경운 겨와진노보다 던진 기부다 즉 대졸라 가르세 고잖아 기부세마 롱세마세도 삼발라다 즉 상기기 송배니 추송 건줄다 다즉 자갈지 번디다 속이 송배 즉 송대졸라니 즉 롱세마 던데시샤나디고.
And again on page 77, the second paragraph, valid, the valid can be applied to various ways. Valid cognition, the one we are talking right now, and then there's a valid person, and also valid scriptures. And here it says that the last two are not valid in their own right, valid person and valid scriptures. So the actual one valid is the valid cognition. And valid person, if we use an illustration, can be, enlightened like a Buddha, and in our time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then talking about valid scriptures, Buddhist discourses, as well as commentaries or teachings by the great Indian masters are can consider as the valid scriptures.
어디지 다단다니 셰바 체마세야다 단다니 생각도 체마다 체민세야디 딩이 던지인데 수모나진 따라 딩이 던지지 질 체마들라 요이나 지금 무슨 체마다 셰바 체마세야 가서 로리 딩기나라 숨바다나 되나지 로리 딩기나네 다직 무슨 체마다 셰바 체마니 체마다 체민이기나네 다 체마들라 자기도 tsema chidane te mayimba tsema diwala yungudu de chidane lori tunji nane tsema yimba da tsema mayimba kazu yorosena tsema yimba nyi da tsema mayimba tsemi yimba di chagdo nga.
So in this context, when we say valid cognition, it is same as the first one of these three: valid cognition, valid person, and valid scripture. The first one, valid cognition, same translation. And within the 7 types of consciousness that we saw earlier, direct perception and inferential cognition, these 2 are valid cognition, and the remaining 5 are not or non-valid mistaken cognition.
다단다 디 어디 와들라 다른 겁도 여기데 남베 세메 슝도 세메 파르마치 빈디보다 세메 파르치 빈디보다 세메 파르마치 빈디보 니수치데 기본도된 양다바 다다 응슈 지리기 세멘디보 바지도 네바 잘도 되네 두 번째도 오세 지진도 디도 어디데 다른 데네 송바나지 기타 직 다른 데 조도 남베 슝나라 다른 데 딘데 조진 조 송도
Third paragraph on page 77. Buddhist epistemological texts differentiate the 2 kinds of effects of valid cognition: mediated effects of valid cognition and unmediated effects of valid cognition. This is to emphasize the point that every genuine goal desired by living beings is accomplished as either a direct or an indirect effect of valid cognition.
어디지 다디 버도 에네 체마기 에네 지금 이 림바도 어디 또 소이 사레 데네 다단데 디간라 디오 데벨로퍼 디나라 에네 체민기 디용도 체민기 모데 체니데 율칸라 서도 밀로 마임비 리베 자자라 자징스 스타틱 체민기 체니데 체마다 체마 마임비 체니 율칸라 서도 밀로 마임비 리발라 자징스 야데 체미디 디치 천진이 담이다 다 천진이 담이다 버토베 제셰단 다단 tiltabu tian 담이다 버토베 제셰 담이다 발라 미다발라 밀로와 임베나 밀로베 던 찬양세스 디 다란디 뉴뉴모지메나 다란디 시슈시는 마고시미도 인지나라야 다란디데 디엔즈마네 담이다 버서도 또 디나라 주바나지 베디 다란디 디치나티도 데네 디텔라네 사토 니게 던 마상 오세데 디네 말라 단다이니 직 세마 임바디 단다이니 모숨다 셰바 세마니 디파 세밍올라도 세밍 임바데라니 로셰 테좀 제셰나라 망에 바데 세밍이 로레스 다란디 디나라 수마나지 데디 시슈샤나디 데디 네 고사.
So after that comes a non-valid cognition, again on the same page 77, the middle of the page. The definition of a non-valid cognition is that which is not a newly acquired and non-deceptive cognition with respect to its object. Instances of non-valid cognition include a subsequent cognition, realizing sound to be impermanent, and a thought holding sound to be permanent. Although a subsequent cognition realizing sound to be impermanent is non-deceptive regarding sound being impermanent, thus satisfying the meaning of non-deceptive, it does not newly realize sound to be impermanent and thus does not satisfy the meaning of newly realizing. A thought holding sound to be permanent, being a mind that distortedly superimposes an incorrect attribute on sound, does not satisfy either the meaning of undeceptive or of newly realizing. Uh, this one we said earlier. Among the seven types of cognition to be discussed or of newly realizing, among the seven types of cognition to be discussed later, distorted cognition, doubt, correct assumption, subsequent cognition, and indeterminate perception are all non-valid cognitions, and the other two, direct perception and the inference, are valid.
어디지 지단에 당한조 단다 디나라 뒤균동한조 즉 슈데고르 디나다 즉 망체다 천이다 요 천이 요와 천시지는 용고르 디나네 즉 간다 강이 바이 나가조 조디 즉 고다 트나리 마트나리 즉 천이딩 하고야 랑아조 배전시고야 돼 개체 보통 것도 지단에 디나네 다다다 디링 먼저 딜럽 센터 로리 든지 여와기 나로네 때 첨바니 옆에나네 단다 세마데 세밀라야 돼 단동아조 남균네 타냐 마다르마도 아주 tiene beju manda odi taran di yongorda anju chala namjun ngato keje she gi namjun ji ni paru inare na min paru inare khari shewa ina dinyi manala halam mingde tar kha semada semin matar madu taran di beju yongorda chik ya ko thong ma thong da chik saw thong ma thong da de zo ne semada semin ina lo la di dora
In the traditional kind of setting, we find the presentation with the definition, and then classifications, then illustrations of each classified kind of um, type, or so whether we were able to understand all or not. But the most important thing that we need to have understanding is the meaning or definition. And having said that, on this topic, valid and non-valid, whether actually we use the actual kind of this expression term or not, but the notion or the concept of valid and non-valid is something that is very much involved with our kind of almost everyday conversation. When you're talking with your friends or when you're talking with your family, whether you are trying to say something is correct or not. This involves, the concept of valid and non-valid.
어디지 지단에 당한저 단다 디나라 슈디 직 천이 여와 가리나데 망보시 용샤게도 되나니 단다 세마다 세민라 천이 되죠 하고 거야 돼 개침모도 이나다 지단에 가 망보 차고 어디나 디딩 고사래 성도 상하나 제바나.
So although we see kind of in the presentation definition, different types, so on and forth, but usually things it's important to have understanding of the definition at least, because this is something that we always kind of use in our daily life.
어디지 다디와 delata 직 또마 탄주벨로 로벤 타와타 바소기 세마라니 테사도 고미고바 지된 타바다 튜니 밀로 시베세마 생이도 셰바 세도 섬발라 단다 디가소다 직 오마 탄주벨로라 양직 세메기 생이들라이니 직 서도 미고바 지된 디나 송바나진 지된 기 타바다 튜니 밀로 셰바 세마 셰바 참 세메 생이도 시에송도 딘 디제도 삼발한 디양직 단다간 라인이 직 주샤바디안 티 만다와 차도 그러다 디나를 송반나 진데시나 페나 제시 남자 랑을지 쪼라 밀로 셰바인 세마르데 바마제 또제 또메지 또메지 제시 남지 랑율 달라마데 버ኞ도지 또뱅 무슨 세마르데 라제 디나다 프레그랍 디나 송반나 진이데라니 지된 랑ар kumdi sunjuri mil tabu tala mateba torni bada mi tela nge ngosunji to serwa tabu inla se tela lu de mangbush mi de tena injina la
Chibal pyode
ibo de ba di tsemba de chik shushana de jiten la ngar di che tela lu de ngosum tsema la to che ta to me nin de loben cholang so ji shuni jone tsema chi da ke la bar ngosum josul la gaban se ba de ranglu josul tumo mayin ba yobana gebal taruki kapsu sheba chawozi da dine tanda paragraph de tara
So in the last paragraph on page 77, we see, middleware consequence interpretation of what is valid cognition and its master Chandrakriti. So Chandrakriti's version of valid and non-valid, definition. As we said earlier, according to the Chandrakriti's traditional middleware consequence school, valid cognition does not need this newly realizing part. It doesn't have to be newly realized, and merely non-deceptive is enough. So it says merely non-deceptive, which is commonly accepted in the world. So it kind of accords suitable or more compatible with the ordinary way of cognition, and therefore subsequent cognition is also considered as a valid cognition, unlike the previous interpretation. And also, in the middle of this paragraph, also both conceptual and non-conceptual subsequent cognition are accepted to be valid direct perception, because the former understands its object not in dependence on reasoning, but through experience. For example, without relying on reasoning, you can know, in a mundane sense, a person whom you met before. You can claim, quote and unquote, I know that person through direct perception. Therefore, both conceptual and non-conceptual forms of direct perception are accepted in this system. Chandrakriti's refutation to Dekyong's epistemology in general, as well as his refutation of Dekyong's views on perception in particular, and Chandrakriti's own unique epistemological views will be addressed in detail in Volume 4. So that's topic for today, not that long, so we can take a break here, or you can ask questions, or maybe after the break. Sure.
So for the people who hold that if a cognition is not a new one,
valid cognition, you mean?
A valid cognition, okay, not a new one, subsequent. For the people who hold that, why are they saying that only newly acquired cognitions?
저거는 제가 당연히 대체비나 어머 tenjuwege tanda dawa chakwa shizu jida en sardo gu mare slago ro sunga. Nega sardo gu mare sunga jizima da dee na ene dee kongla sardo yin gu re la sunga jimze kharesa.
Tadi ene tanda chitane tanda ene chik sungendang ene chik ma kibu tupta sosogi tozu dang dende kebar yora digi kebar de hago oche gore pena manzo nambashun la ene tupta sosogi tozu ki wangi ta dende chabarese na digi to tangbo. Gande chide tupta tanda gang la ene di sungsong tanda ene dode bani oma rangyu bapardo ene dosul do digang la dugu to tadi ene tanda khorangi yang chik oma tanjuwa yang to 만다와 시간라 데니 송거 디 개발 예배 돈에는 즉 강사 소소소소라 다직 강대에는 렘바데 켈레나 디고 답변 다른 남주는 저 상기 소만하지로 다 강대 즉 소소라 에는 즉 강대에는 즉 렘바에 디켈레
newly realizing, accepting whether that is part of the valid cognition's definition or not. For that, we need to understand Buddhist tenets and their assertion. So different philosophical schools comes with their own interpretations. As we saw briefly earlier, those who assert such Sutra school, and all the way up to a middle way autonomous school. And the high school, Chandrakriti, has a different interpretation. So again, the general kind of understanding is that whatever is suitable to your intellectual, you accept that, and then you interpret that. And that's the general interpretation, whatever is compatible or whatever is suitable to interpretation, you interpret that and you assert that kind of definition or meaning. Yes.
It says, in the text, it said, the part that says non-deceptive excludes correct assumption, doubt, and distorted cognition. As lot of distorted cognition seem apparent, but how can something be correct and deceptive?
Correct assumption?
Yes,
Mm.
correct assumption is excluded from valid cognition. Because I guess it's considered deceptive. It's the qualifier non-deceptive is what excludes it. So how can a correct assumption be considered deceptive?
Okay. Okay, tanda ko moran jo de sha da chemin gi cheme go logi tanda chenyin shdo ba de. Sa de malo ri go cheme tim
재미고 시비샤니
신예. sa de malo mo chenyin su cheme jo ji me lo she ne cheme go ji go she chen di ma de cheme.
서도 밀루 리바 재미고
so je cheme cheme do de o ma ri. 체면 등이 제 쉬어 되게 제대
제데데 재미소도 서도 집에 제시 재마인 버쳐지
제시인데 신바디게다 되게도서 뭐란 게 신바디게다 되게도서 한다 태좀다 직접다 되게도 되네 이 주에다 인지도를 고 커렉트 티셔를 이 주에 치다만 저거를
알 이주 알 이주데 데스코 디노라 이주데 디바르스니 랍데
이제도 주에 주교도 나올 텐데 주에 날이 주데 이 쇼랑 하줄도
니 시비샤니 데간도 밀루와 집에 이주다 태좀 록시 록시는 테마인 버쳐 테마
주에 컨데스 제거를 태좀다 록시다 되게도서 테마 많이 봐 테마 임버 주에 되게도서 고 태좀다 록시다 하고도 이제도 테마 임버 근데 저거를도
다 이주데가 테마인 바 이주데 테마인 바 킬링 마라다 뭐 그런 테마레서 뭐 테마 마르서 뭐
So Geshe was asking, what do you think the correct assumption itself is valid? Or
This is correct.
뭐랑 제 말에서 모두 다 인지도로
단다 지단에 단다 디간라 단다 지단에 단다 디니 슈나라 숨바나지 제바나다 세마다 세명이기나네 로리든기나네 세마 임바데다 모숨다 제바니 세마 참아니 세마마 임발라 송도다디 용다다란디 딘디 인사이 데나 다디 규단데가 실라디 쳐
제가 이주들 가진 이주도 가진 제가 말해려도
다 세마 마임바 단다 세마 임발 단다디 세메 생이디 장메 세메 살도 이주되거나 지단에 살도 디 저기서 말아 살도 밀로 저기서 말아 다 살도 시 메바기 아니 디 딘조에니 세마 말해서 세메 생이 상고 말해서 당한 디 시다고 이제 나라 데마인 발로리든 셴바사 상마이는 디마레 디균젠데 가르잖아 아니 직 서도 밀루리바 마레 세마 마레죠
correct assumption
이제 데 커레 디바레스 인지나라 딘디 랍샤도로
the 이주도 인지도로 등교체셔다 인지도
네
a correct assumption is excluded because the correct assumption when you look at the its definition and when you look at the definition of valid cognition which we just saw earlier newly acquired and non-deceptive the correct assumption doesn't come under that definition and non-deceptive cognition
Or which, although it one pointedly determines the phenomenon which is its main object of observation, does not be an object with respect to which superimpositions. And
so the general kind of way of explanation for you is that because
이쪽이 천인인데
just like the other five, including doubt distorted, this doesn't kind of have the or covered by the definition of valid cognition. These are outside of the valid cognition. That's a general kind of explanation. And then more particularly,
네, 근데 단다데 디미 종에 디젤레티 이쪽 등에 디젤레티 디주고데 또 보지래.
Geshe saying that
Yes,
it's
she let
good,
it
good doubt, but he will explain later.
네버
좀
니도 좀 봐도 tsemayin bala yana ngay gore yana mangay gore di tanda yana ichoki tsangi di shingbo chiyo
He will explain through its definition. So basically, I was reminding him in correct assumption, what you need is you have a kind of you have a certainty, but it's not backed up by reason. So that's why it is not valid. Yeah, so correct assumption is, you're emphasizing more on the correct. I was more emphasizing the assumption. It's an assumption, it's not. Yeah. Yeah. You could be wrong. You don't know yet.
Yeah.
Take a break here.
Okay, so my question was, so until we reach the stage of enlightenment, we are always under non-valid cognition. So we may never attain valid cognition states in this lifetime, it seems, because we're still have too many assumptions or not understanding, right? Thank you. This is great teaching, but
I got
thank
you.
you.
The under one dish, the Gonzo Samba that you get Mato Boduani, the Logia, the some of the semi in the semi Yanjaros. The ones of Hello, shit, Ijudo, the Jigda, Jiggy, some of the Jiggy, Taju color. Yomarolo.
Oh, di marta tayang. Tayina ta ngazu tanda ngarang zu tanda digang la. Tengok pun nesu la ta cik di cik kari ngazu saya tunya sudah na di ceme ngosun ziyan shora ta pena saya ki shingto to kushu to na di kushu ngone re se ngazu jiten traso la ta di ngone yimba de ngone ke ngone re la na ngone ma yimba de mane ta cik zuma de ta desa zuma kushu zuma yora. Zumayin bade zumayin bahago digi keba dendeji chego chir danda de yang samlo gyachembo tawayin nga zo sangye bala ta chik da nilu thamje ne chik zumayin ba to ade odire da chik sangye zidu zambala ta changma hago ne denden shesona ta chik chasanwaji to do gorda odiyan chagorda ta samlo tangso nido charo.
So we're saying kind of two ways of looking at this. Partly we read earlier the everyday convention of the world, that is important. So what we kind of use our cognition in our everyday convention of the world, such as recognizing apple as an apple, those were valid and according to the worldly kind of convention. In that sort of level or mundane conventional, there are lots of things that we consider as a valid, but then attaining of enlightenment is sort of whole another level or way of recognition or knowing, which of course is based on the valid cognition. Sausage.
No, or didn't take the road, then she could lend us.
Any further question?
Go ahead.
Barb she's muted. You're muted. Barb, you're muted.
Okay, sorry, guys. I'm old. So it seems like we're in kind of a major social and a paradigm shift right now in our world, at least for me. So what I believed was true and valid before doesn't appear to be true and valid in a lot of the positions that we are engaged with right now. So that would be great. So do we shift our understanding according to the powers that are in the leadership positions at this point, or do we stay with, I think that's wrong. I think we stay with what we know from Buddhist teachings. But how do you manage that? Because we're getting it from so many sources directly with communications and with laws and everything else.
또 모랑게 삼당다는 지기 간주기 신해줘라. 신해디 지기 교왔던 거여도 도서 직신의 유머를도 배신당 좀 남겨 주균 신해줘라. 등규 미기 신해디 양지 신해 임바데 걸어다 체마 차상 체마란다 말어. 다된도 걸어 지기 상계 그분도 단양 지기 체마 차도 좀 뭐냐 신다데. 근데 다양 당한주 가르 신바데 단다 남배 최 나올 수 있는 시지기 디시샤 지나 지기면 로로도 디마이바야 보고지 체마 이미 걸러서 다 좋아. 체마 이미 걸다 시다샤 담아는 담아는 쉐이로. 공토선에 다 팀도 돈에네. 이제 좀 다지기 그 가게를 시샤고 에메다 이 개발 면로도 다. 그리고 건들는 거죠.
다 된다 다른데 된다가도 지게 빼나가도 상계라 켈랭게 짐바나 상계발라 람데카르는 땅도 직 렘바당 직 노르와 툴로 마임바 양다 바임바 텔라 지단에 땅도 직 삼로도 짐바이나 직다 참바다 니제 제와 덴데기 람네 야도지 네 상계 고바테 네직 체마 임바다 마임바 제바제네 데 체마 임바 켈랭도 잠발라 데 타란 자기 람상벌레 두고 요바데 땅도 딘 체마 디게 또두고 다른 고
Wow.
So somebody who accepts and follows Buddhism follows Buddhist path and consider that as a valid, not distorted or unmistaken, such as the practice of loving kindness and compassion. And for the practitioners, those practices are considered as a valid, as a proper means to attain Buddhahood. And therefore, those were paths that were, practiced and followed by Buddhists, assuming that, or with the understanding that those were valid. So, but then Geshe was saying that it may kind of depends on the sources or the information of, how you kind of practice or engage.
So it's giving us a wonderful or a very deeper understanding of basically what's happened in Tibet and under different rulers and roles and ideas and conceptions. We may not in our country have had that same experience, but maybe this is a gift of deeper understanding of those like Geshe who have, experienced things that we had yet not experienced. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
단다 디 지단이 단다 이주들라 똑바체 지기서리 this is another chick Kebasusugian, Shizumando Yesari.
Jagational Gestional Tungu Samaro, Susundashina. Gestional Tungu Samaro,
all these. Tanda Udinala, Tangi, and the Tangi, the Dishira Shating of China, and you delang, Sangi, Chamani Machilla teaching, and you Tatani teaching, and you this so chill.
So the correct assumption that he asked,
yeah,
Geshe was saying, he will come back with the more explanation, because the correct assumption itself is the this concept is again open for debate. From my understanding, what I was informing him, it was not openly kind of presented in classic Indian scriptures. It's found more in the Tibetan, so whether it is part of the actual cognition or not, it's debatable. So the definition, page 268, I read that earlier, construing awareness that conceives with conviction the main thing, that is engaged object, but does not obtain a realization of its object of scrutiny. So then, kind of it explains each part of the definition. The phrase, the main thing that is engaged object, quote unquote, excludes distorted cognition from overlapping with correct assumption. And then with conviction, excludes doubt, overlapping with the correct, exclude doubt, conceives, exclude the direct perception, does not obtain a realization of its object of scrutiny, excludes subsequent cognition, as well as inferential cognition. So again, Geshe said he will come back with more explanation on the.
I have a question.
So yeah, immediately after that it says does not explicitly appear in the Dekyong and Dharmakirti's text. This correct assumption, the term doesn't come in the classic Indian text. Dekyong the Cholandi got it.
Lovin Chola.
Simzamba, mine only, yeah. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, in looking, and this is at the bottom of page 76, talking about Chandrakirti's classification. Valid cognition is posited only on the basis of being non-deceptive in agreement with what is commonly accepted in everyday conventions of the world. So earlier, if we say this is an apple, it is non-deceptive within the system because it's correct in accordance with convention. But isn't it always mistaken? Kind of jumping ahead, because what you're seeing is merely labeled as an apple. You're not contemplating the underlying reality of the existence of that object. Is that a correct way to think about it?
Tema jigdeng ka chakpa da tyung ure la ora. Deng ka morang da chuwa di beshin di kushura la di ko di kansa di ngol da chu yo ma de ni ka chidane khala ora nang gyong zun.
Chuta kumala.
Me ngo tenju welo la. Tokwa ni chushen bi chab la cha. Chuba der sha di ko ko di kasha ko tokbe da sha ma da jigi
Did ta pena tanganzo te tarandi yongor chidan namjine pena nganzo yite chidan tabe kunzo mala chingse de ngondo yinba ta kanta ya dende no chidan nganzo chidan takso la khari chigi yoba dida tune yang chi khelen kwa ta wada te mayin ba nganzo ta chubda la samlo ta ba ina ta nganzo pagi oma tanju welu la cheba ina dendo ki chudo za me par khelen de samba ya ko shamba le kyuto gore dia tarang tangcho nya yores the DNA chik kebar yowa de nge goya de kechambare so da chik ya wochawane chirda nga zo gina ne de chik ya wodang chik thema da chemin se de nge goya da de na ne tayang chik ya kondu joy na odi tanda oma tanju wi lugi ta sama de kelen go le ba tang
In the supplement to the middle way path, or engaging in the middle way path, there's emphasis by the author saying that Chandrakirti, do not lose, the mundane convention of the world. And so one needs to kind of first understand these two level of, the I guess realization or recognition. One by the ordinary mundane, and one shouldn't be against the mundane way of cognition. The example that you get, this is apple. And then that is one kind of then as you go up, in the philosophical schools, the highest middle way consequence school, interpretations of nothing exists, objectively or inherently, which seems to be contradicting conventional kind of identification, but that itself is the reality and the fact. But so one needs to understand both, and middle way consequence kind of interpretations of the ultimate reality, and need to understand both, and but also kind of applying accordingly, what is appropriate depending on the circumstance or situation. So one needs to understand both, and also both has its own kind of
다 강사 장아서 돌드나 직 쳐서 양다방 해발라 던주 루 켈랭 거라 던주 루 시자 삼로 땅 거래서 직 양다바
So ultimately, if you need to understand the reality, then we need to rely upon, or we need to have that interpretation by middle way consequence schools understanding.
지단에 가서기 상기기 수능나라 상기기 수능 어디서 상기 지단에 상기 건 온당 직 도자기 감담해 발라 때문에 수능을 지단 상기기 수능라야니 직 성이기 좁아다 만료받아 좁아도 temper 신의 송바된데 나서 요래 다 온된지 캠베토네다 돌드나다 단다디 던주 루체바네 직 양다바도다 데디 시간라 도라 디마임바 딩에네야 직 저차상 직 다양 직 마레라에 라야 마야 직 손단단 도자기 감담해 발라 때문에 손에 다 주망 보여라.
So generally, when we look at the Buddhist teachings, as you know, the Buddhist teaching was taught to always is according to the mental dispositions or level of the intellectuals of the followers. So Buddha taught both, things having objective self-characteristic, as well as doesn't possess self-characteristic. So his teachings is diverse. And so ultimately, as we said earlier, to understand the reality, it is middle way consequence schools interpretations, which is valid. We need to go on with that. But then again, there are conventional kind of, interpretations of perceptions, what's valid and not. Those are equally important. So it depends on the, I guess the practitioners or experiences, or the person's kind of ways of understanding, depending on the level of realizations.
Isn't it two sides of the same coin? In sense both are true.
니가 덴바인 바로 레벨로도 다 지금
니가 덴바인스나 타르도 덴바가 좀 남부 춘이 섬로다 최다 직 최던제 덴두게 최두자 매바 켈레 데zambalata domde 파 디차도라 지단에 좁다낭라에 좁다 오마 데수 고마기 찍마 디치네 도라 어디서요 좁다 오마 메텍세 찍 디친마 딜라테네 파찍 타마 돌드나가 저기 찍 다 쇼네 셔바이나 양다바데 칸통와데 켈레야다 이나야다 좁다 제바이나 다직 좁다나네 직 좁다 야가도 단다 오마탄 루도 데 켈랭고 거기도 차고라.
In the tenets or philosophical systems of school, it says that the lower school's philosophy serve as a stepping stone for the higher school's philosophy. So, in that sense, what it is saying is that sort of the higher schools sort of um, um, dismiss the lower school's interpretations or their assertions, and ultimately, as we said earlier, middleware consequence schools assertion that things doesn't exist even slide is kind of atomic objectively, and and but it but what what people accept is based on their kind of highest or deepest level of understanding. So at that level, they accept, according to that level of understanding, they accept what is most compatible or suitable at that level. But then again, in the tenet system, the highest is considered as the middle way school's assertion or interpretations. Sure.
Going back to the definition of valid cognition is non-deceptive cognition. So when it comes to non-deceptive, I'm wondering who decides if something is non. So my own object, something appears a certain way to me because it appears that way. I believe it's non-deceptive. Someone else could be looking at the same thing with a view of it.
Okay.
What's the final determination? Or is there? It almost seems like there can't be.
I think middle way would see both as valid and both as invalid.
디던더 생명사도 메로라고. 근데 루 말로래 수 타주시고 그래로도. 더 코란도 오시는 코란기 지금 찍을 따고 있나로. 다들 코란에 루어메 버 통선은 코란 원래 루어메 버더로. 그 코란 루어메 버더 는 치로. 다 심바지 다들 좀 양 심바 당에 되게 루어지네 콜렉 루어 차대로. 근데 다 타면 타주들 루메로래 타주 수치 그래로도.
어디래래 다디디 여다 콜라이네 지요 된다고 단당한 다 지단이 깨져시는 좀 다나 투몬다 투모마임바 사치 가자직 라인이 직 임바 통나 가자직 라 마임바 통 다랑 요르다 요 이나야 조조 단당한 좀팀 지게 단다디 이 세마다 세메마임바즈도 좀발 지 용기 투몽기 자야다 다 투몽 투몽을 잠발라 직 간자 용다스다 켈레질 텐디질 자고다
So what you are saying, you're saying it exists, it is reality that to some people, appears as non-deceptive, to some deceptive on the same object of the observation. But here it is, saying kind of from general or more kind of universal ways of perception.
다나징이 단단한 저다 배팅을 다 타워도에는 우마탄주 빌루라체 우마탄주 빌루나지 켈레바이나 다다 테마거나 디차다라 테마다 재민 또바이나 테마다 직최다 쇼간다 칸이바이나 덴버 모두바 덴버 모두바 또송아이나 다디 또라 테마임바 또라 딜라얀디 요마르 간사틱라 토마토세 요마로
So you're saying, say if hypothetically somebody has completely realized or understood the middle way consequence philosophy or their view, and for that person, lack of intrinsic or inherent existence is the valid. So somebody who has realized, the middle way consequent school's assertion of philosophy, then that is the reality or valid, and then we cannot, just like you did, we cannot appreciate, we cannot sort of differentiate based on the individual, that individual, whoever understood the sort of the system has understood, or understood in a valid way, non-deceptive way, and so again, it becomes more kind of universal common rather than individual kind of perceptions.
Tiwa mea bayi na di che sha hu ta nganzo la tang nganzo nga doji tang yang ju samsu doji shi bayi na tanda mangyong do kare she ma she na ta kyunzo la kande shi kogi yue me tengi ha kumi do di ina ta nganzo tende se tiwa do le tiwa tilen tende yong yung to samba la tesi tile kya chik tiwa ngoni di che ya da ha kogi re samba chik lo do ha ko yo ba chik choba do se na chik tende shi yong do se nga chik tiwa dan tende ngoni nganzo mang che
So Geshe was saying, still for him it's kind of he don't know exactly kind of how to I guess simply how to teach or how to interpret, to what length, and coming up with the questions is very helpful, and so that it can help him to kind of sort of estimate to what extent, to what kind of in depth that he needs to go for the explanation. So it's very helpful, and for that I want to say thank you.
That's all. Page 40. Oh, page 14 and so.
Chancho sencho rinpo che ma che panam kenjuro che kewa nyamba meba kone kondo pewa rasho kari rave kowe shingande pendang dewa malin jungwe shiri sewa tenzin kyazo ye chabe side bardo denjo roche jaba bawe chidara kemba Jaba bawe chedara kemba dan kundo sambo deyan dijin Yeda kunji cheso dalo je gewa dida tamje rabdo ngo eti sumu shebe gyawa tamje ngo kan la choto nga ba de taki kewe tsawa di kun jang sambo cheje rabdo ngo in English. Rimjubal Bodhicitta has not risen and risen grow, and the bed has risen not as much, but increased more and more. In the lands entered by the sun origin, much the source of happiness and benefit flow in your person, praise it Tenzin. Please remain until samsara ends. Just a bodhisattva, Mandu Shiri, then the so
Also, the vigorous Buddhas of the past, present, future,
praise and dedication and our supreme. So now I am to dedicate those souls of my men, things of perfect and good action. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.